Chicago is the most populous city in the Midwestern United States, located on the shores of Lake Michigan. The third most populous city in the United States after New York and Los Angeles, with a population of more than 2.7 million people, while in 1950 the city had a peak population of more than 3.6 million people, and about 9.5 million people currently live in the Chicago metropolitan area. Chicago is an international center of finance, culture, trade, industry, education, technology, telecommunications, and the largest transportation hub in the United States. In the world ranking of global cities, it occupied the 19th place with the Alpha type for 2020. The Chicago area brought $689 billion to the USA economy in 2018. Chicago's economy is diverse. No branch of the economy employs more than 14% of the workforce. Now the architecture of the central part of Chicago is dominated by high-rise buildings. Most of the skyscrapers in the USA are located in New York. There are over 216 buildings with a height of at least 590 feet or 180 meters, including those under construction. In second place is our favorite Chicago with 114 skyscrapers at least 492 feet or 150 meters high, including those under construction. In general, as you understood, you can continue about Chicago indefinitely. Let's take a look at the 19th century and see what it was like there. Wait, Robert, why are you showing us London or not? It's Paris, no St. Petersburg in Russia or Madrid. This game can go on indefinitely, but in fact this is Chicago. But it's just amazing, where have all these beautiful architectural buildings disappeared? After all, Americans know how to honor and remember their great history. In 1871, the so-called Great Chicago Fire took place, which raged from October 8 to October 10. The 30-hour fire killed about 300 people, destroyed about 3 square miles, 9 square kilometers, of the city, including more than 17,000 buildings, and left more than 100,000 residents homeless, according to the Wikipedia portal. The fire started in an area southwest of the city center. The fire was caused by a long period of hot, dry, and windy weather. For example, now, based on the Wikipedia table, 386 inches of rain or about 100 millimeters falls in October. This is more than in September, and in general, the climate of Chicago is not the climate of Los Angeles. Dryness has never been different. The predominant wooden building in the city. So wait for a wooden building, it may have been, but as we can see in the numerous preserved photographs, there were a huge number of stone buildings, especially in the central part. The fire spread across the south branch of the Chicago River and destroyed most of downtown Chicago. It is also worth paying attention to the number of deaths. It seems to me that this figure is small. No, do not think that the author is bloodthirsty. It's just that according to the same Wikipedia in 1870, almost 300,000 people lived in Chicago and 17,000 buildings were destroyed, once again 17,000 buildings, and only 300 people died. Usually after such fires there are problems with food, water, various epidemics break out, but no, everything is different here. At the same time, the population over the next 10 years increased by almost 69% or almost 200,000. Once again by 200,000. Can you imagine this figure now? Where did they all come from and why? Is that a question? Would you go to a city where 100,000 people were left homeless and 17,000 buildings were destroyed? Write in the comments, I am interested in your opinion. From modern history, only New Orleans comes to mind, where Hurricane Katrina passed in 2005, so after that more than 120,000 people left the city, and the city's population has not yet reached hurricane figures. Let's take a look at some modern fire in a historic building. The first thing that came to mind was of course the fire in Notre Dame Cathedral in 2019, which began on April 15 shortly before 1850 Central European time. The fire was extinguished on the morning of April 16. Well, as a result, Probably the collapse of the cathedral and the destruction of another monument of the Middle Ages. Well, no, if we look at the photo, what happened led to the collapse of the spire and part of the roof, as well as damage to the interior. And the cathedral is being reconstructed now and it will be open soon. But in Chicago, similar buildings were destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth. Surely many of you have heard about the epidemic of fires that swept the planet in the late 19th and early 20th centuries? The last millennium, very shallow antiquity. It is important. Well, who doesn't know? It doesn't matter. Now I will explain what it is about. Everything is simple. In the second half of this most mysterious 19th century, there were a number of fires in large cities on several continents of the planet at once. Very similar to each other. To be precise, there are also a bunch of earthquakes with tsunamis, and 100 comets with meteorites. In a word, a fun time. I'm even afraid to give a list. For some reason, North America was most unlucky. Although, perhaps, everything is simpler, there is more information on this subject in the New World. And this list is only for North America. The number of fires is surprising. Just how did they occur? Maybe there was some kind of big world war. But as we know from history, there was no such thing in the 19th century. Therefore, these are all fantasies of inquisitive minds, including your author. If you look at some photos after the fire, you can see that the buildings have been turned into small crumbs. And Chicago itself has been turned into ruins. An eerie sight. I don't see any burnt-out wooden buildings yet. Some poles are visible, but not burnt. Nothing charred or sooty. Eyewitnesses very colorfully describe marble melting in flames and flowing metal. Let's compare it with something. Here is London on the right after the bombing during the Second World War. It seems very similar to me. One of the professional journalists of the Chicago Tribune immediately threw in a rumor that the fire started in the barn of an Irish immigrant, Mrs. O'Leary. She was milking a cow, and the cow kicked the oil lamp. There are many variants of pictures of this cow, and they all kick back. But cows do not know how to do this. They are not horses, they can only kick forward. This is their constitution. It was only in 1893 that reporter Michael Ahern rejected the story of the cow and the lantern, admitting that it was fabricated, but even his confession could not put an end to the legend. The myth has already gone down in history that the wooden town of Chicago burned down because of a cow. And 3 years later, history repeated itself. Another fire begins in Chicago. It occurred on July 14, 1874, burned 47 acres, 19 hectares, destroyed 812 buildings and killed 20 people. At the same time, it is worth noting that after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 led to the emergence of new fire safety rules that prohibited the construction of wooden buildings in certain areas of the central part adjacent to Lake Michigan. And in the same 1893, Chicago was filled with crowds of people, but in 22 years after the fire a new generation could hardly grow up. Traces of fires are absolutely not visible. This year a big event took place in Chicago, the World Columbian Exposition. It was held from May 1 to October 9, 1893. The exhibition area was 690 acres or 2.8 square kilometers and 46 countries participated outside. More than 27 million people have visited it all the time, and again 27 million people. Where did these people come from and how they were brought to the exhibition? Because at that time only a little more than 1 million people lived in Chicago itself, and in the whole USA, according to the 1890 census, only 63 million people lived. It is claimed that all these buildings were built specifically for the exhibition. Over 200 structures were built in 3 years, which were supposedly temporary. What? Are these all temporary buildings? And where are the documents and photos of how the city was reconstructed? There are none, we just see a very beautiful final result. And in 1909, the so-called Burnham Plan appeared, the popular name of the Chicago Plan, the co-authors of which were Daniel Burnham and Edward H. Bennett. Only 2 buildings have survived to this day, which are still in place. This is the Palace of Fine Arts and Auxiliary Building of the World Congress. All the buildings at the exhibition were made in white and were distinguished by symmetry, balance, and splendor. They became the crown of the development of the architectural style of Beaux-Arts. Therefore, the complex was called the White City. The main building of the exhibition in Chicago is 4 times larger than the Roman Colosseum, about 20 football fields. It consisted of frames that required twice as much metal as the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. It is also surprising that a huge station of 35 tracks was built allegedly only for this exhibition. For example, the largest Munich railway station in Germany still contains only 34 railway tracks. And where are the photos of how these structures are dismantled again? Why is it interesting that they don't build like this now? Never thought about it, but it's very beautiful, you'll agree, just an open-air museum. Or do you like it that way? The Columbian Exposition is essentially an analog of the Expo of our days. So Expo 2020, which was formerly held in 2021 and 2022, was visited by 24 million people, and 192 countries participated. But it is worth noting that the technology of moving people is not comparable to the technologies of the 19th century. People have now become much more mobile. Traveling and visiting have become an integral part of life for many. You can compare a visit to the North American International Auto Show or the more familiar name Detroit Auto Show, so the attendance record was 838,000 in 2003. Yes, this is not such a massive event as Expo, but still. But the population of the Detroit metropolitan area is more than 4 million people. So, what do we have in the end? A fire in 1871, and 22 years later an exhibition with stunning buildings. Don't you think it's possible that these two events are reversed in history? Then at least it is clear that why there are no photos of reconstructions and how buildings are dismantled. And could the city recover in such a short time? I personally don't believe it. At one time, a young American scientist V. Chamberlain claimed that the fire started not only in Chicago, but also in a number of other localities in the Lake Michigan area. That's what the fire chief, Chicago Fire Chief Medill, said. When we received the first message that one of the houses caught fire, almost immediately came the news of a fire that started in the church, St. Paul, located 2 miles from the site of the first fire. Then alarm signals began to come from different parts of the city, so we didn't know where to rush to. It is absolutely unthinkable that all these numerous fires started from one cow stall. No flying fire could be so fast. To find out the reasons, Chamberlain went into the archives and found a number of rather mysterious details in the book, The History of the Chicago Fire. For example, in the documents of one of the affected cities located near Chicago, he found a message in which it was written, "How fire rained on Sodom and Gomorrah. Like firebrands flying from a fire, fiery stones fell on people on foot, on horseback and in carts trying to escape from chaos." Survivors of the fire said that that evening the marble burned like coal. Eyewitnesses said that houses standing far from the burning buildings were suddenly engaged in fire. There was even more incomprehensible in the descriptions of the species of those who died during the fire. Hundreds of corpses were found in the vicinity of the city. These were people trying to escape from the burning city. Corpses lay along the roads and in the fields, that is, in places where there was no fire. Moreover, no burns were visible on the bodies or on the clothes. The same can be said about the countless corpses of dead animals. All these facts led the scientists to believe that the cause of the tragedy in Chicago was a blow from space or the fall of a comet. Chamberlain found the work of astronomer Ignatius Donnelly, summarizing information about all comets and meteorite falls observed in the 19th century. His attention was attracted by a comet discovered in 1826 by the Austrian scientist Wilhelm von Biela. In November 1872, in many European countries, a heavy star shower was observed. Meteors flew from a section of the sky where astronomers expected the appearance of a celestial wanderer. Or maybe the comet touched earlier from the surface of the Earth. And in North America, this could just happen in October 1871. Do my viewers believe that the comet destroyed the city? And who destroyed the other cities? And for what reasons did fires occur in them? Personally, I do not deny a nuclear strike or some kind of aerial bombing of Chicago and all of North America. You say, so the nuclear bomb appeared much later. Look at the buildings of those times, what technologies are there, we didn't even get close to them. It's just a different level, a different civilization, and it's hard for an ordinary man in the street to believe it. Now Americans, like Europeans, would be proud of this heritage of the past and would not fly to Europe to look at these historic beautiful buildings. But who decided for us that we would be a new world with a new fake story? Put likes if you liked the video or dislikes. No offense. Subscribe to the channel, there are a lot of interesting things ahead.